Director William Murdoch is tuning in here, and he's going to take over, and I'll turn my camera off.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. I'm William Murdoch with MORPC, and we appreciate you being here at the latest in our rural forums. We hope you're enjoying summer and staying well, and we appreciate the chance to do this virtually. We are really looking forward to seeing you in person here this fall, and just appreciate you being part of what's going to be a great session today about zoning rules and things to think about in our economy and in our housing market. Before we get started, there are a couple of things that I want to make you aware of as MORPC members or community members in Central Ohio. There are some really practical things that we work on with local governments. Through our sustainability programs, we now have the ability for you to earn Solar Soul Smart designation and get technical assistance, work on complete streets policies, so really thinking about bikes and pedestrians and safe routes to schools, housing information, and of course for those with health conditions, air quality, something we watch and forecast very closely. On the next slide, we introduced a new program for your businesses this summer. We know a lot of local communities have businesses that are really trying to hone in on employees who will get to work every day. And so we introduced the MORPC Commute Action Fund. And this is a program that is actually giving grants to small businesses and other businesses to help get employees to and from work. All you need to do is make the introduction to us, and we'll take care of the rest. So great new program about economic development. A really practical thing we're doing is an annual salary and fringe benefits survey of local governments. Last year we had over 30 local governments. It's basically a comp and class study for the region, and whether you're a township or a county or a city, it's a great resource for you, and it depends on participation. So if you and your community haven't filled it out yet, there's still time, and if you need help, just let us know. And last, we have a couple of events coming up. One that's our most popular on social media and local government. We've got one on trains, planes, and flying cars in jest, but there are some all sorts of things happening in aviation and autonomy. We're looking at Central Ohio's airports and where they're going, and a really important event on transportation safety on September 21st. All of these are available to you. We also have our summit on sustainability. This event's, it's all about what local governments are doing. So focusing on bike trails and air quality and water quality and streams, and it's in person this year on October 15th. And last but not least, before I turn it over to Eileen, for those of you who want to attend the commission meeting, we're going back in person on August 12th. We really invite you to come down. Our building's been renovated. It'll be great to see everybody in person, and we'll do it safely. And then later that day, if you want, you can join us for the MORPC Night at the Clippers and see our board officer throw out the first pitch. So with that, thanks, and we appreciate you being here. Enjoy the forum. I know that you'll learn a lot from it.
All right, thank you, William. Thank you so much. So we are now going to have our interns turn on their cameras, and our three speakers turn on their cameras and their sound, so we can go ahead and introduce this great panel. So our first speaker will be introduced by Cameron Krashidi, who will introduce Catherine Cunningham. So right ahead, Cameron.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cameron Krashidi, a student at The Ohio State University. I'm currently working at the City of Reynoldsburg under the MORPC Local Government Internship Program. I have plans to graduate with my bachelor's in city and regional planning after the autumn semester of this year. I am honored to introduce Catherine Cunningham, an attorney with Kegler, Brown, Hill, and Ritter, who has extensive experience practicing in the areas of real estate, land use, zoning, annexation, development, tax incentives, eminent domain, local government, and public and administrative law. She represents property owners, developers, and local governments as special counsel in these areas. Ms. Cunningham regularly appears before local government boards, commissions, and legislative authorities, and has litigated cases in these areas in all state courts, including the Supreme Court of Ohio. She is a member of the City of Hilliard Housing Council, a former City of Hilliard Law Director, a former Village of New Concord Solicitor, a former member of the Franklin County Tax Incentive Review Council, and a commissioner on the Ohio Elections Commission. She has lectured attorneys and government officials on topics related to development, zoning, annexation, administrative appeals, litigation, sunshine law, and ethics. Please welcome Catherine Cunningham.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Next, Mose Latimer will introduce John Melkai.
Good morning, everyone. I am Mose Lattimore, a master's student in the City and Regional Planning program at The Ohio State University. I also completed my bachelor's degree in City and Regional Planning program there. I am currently interning at Union County Marysville Economic Development and will graduate in the spring of 2023. Today, I am honored to introduce John Melkai, Executive Director of the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio, which is in its 76th year of serving the Central Ohio residential construction community by representing nearly 800 builders, developers, and associate members. Before joining the BIA, John served as the Vice President of Government Affairs and Business Development with Heating, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration Distributors International. He has served on the Board of Directors for Family Business Coalition and the Small Business Legislative Council, and is a current board member with the Ohio Society of Association Executives. John is a graduate of The Ohio State University. Please welcome John Melkai.
Thank you very much.
All right, John, looking forward to it. And then our third panelist will be introduced by intern Hannah Wynn.
Good morning. I'm Hannah Wynn. I'm completing a double major in environmental studies and geography at Ohio University in Athens. I'm interning at the city of Circleville as a result of their receiving an OU Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Service Award. I will be graduating in the spring of 2022. I'm honored to introduce Scott Mallory this morning. Scott is the founder and chief executive officer of Highland Real Estate Group. After graduating from the United States Military Academy, Scott served in the Army as a field artillery officer. Upon completing his obligation, Scott returned to the Midwest for graduate school. After receiving his MBA, he accepted a position with a national real estate developer. In 2000, Scott left the company to start Highland Real Estate Group, a full-service real estate firm with interests in development, brokerage, and advisory services. Scott holds a BS from the United States Military Academy and an MBA from Indiana University. We welcome Scott Mallory, who will be addressing the viewpoints of a current developer.
All right, excellent. All right, thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Great. All right. Wow, what a panel. We're going to let all of our interns and our panelists turn off their cameras except for Catherine. You're up first, Catherine. So Catherine is going to tell us what is the practical rules that our communities need to attract private investment, to set up good housing models in their community. She's got extensive experience. So Catherine, the floor is yours. Oh, you want to turn on your sound.
There we go. I have a few slides and we're just going to go over some basics today. It's a very broad subject matter. I know there will be some questions and answer period at the end, and I'm certainly happy to follow up through more of C. So one of the first things is, I know we have communities, some who may have zoning, some who may not, some who are larger, some who are smaller. I've worked in all of those kinds of communities. So one of the zoning essentials is, what is zoning? Next. And what zoning is the division of a political subdivision. In Ohio, that would be a municipality or a county or a township, because zoning is a local phenomenon, into districts, and the regulation of land, building, and structures according to their nature and use. That's what the definition of zoning is. There are 4 major areas of zoning, and those 4 areas are kind of divided into 2 different categories. The first 2, creating and adopting a zoning ordinance or resolution if you're a township or county, and a map, which is how the classifications that your jurisdiction is going to be divided into. That's a legislative function that's created either by a city council, township trustees, or county commissioners. And then amending that zoning code, the words in the code, or the map itself, changing the zoning classification on the map from one to another. That is also a legislative function. That's going to be done, again, by your city council, county commissioners, or township trustees. Then there are 2 other areas of zoning that are what we would consider administrative areas. And those are some special uses or exceptions under the zoning code. Those are called variances, which is basically, I always call that permission to break the rules. You can't quite comply with the rules because you have unique and special circumstances. That would be a variance. Or a conditional use, maybe your use is an intense use or has some characteristics that need special conditions depending on what you're doing. A lot of things that we typically see fall into that is gas stations and the like. And then enforcement. So if somebody doesn't comply with what they're supposed to do, enforcement is you may have zoning officials and building officials. Typically, in this case, we've been talking about zoning officials doing enforcement in the code. Variance and enforcement are administrative, completely different remedies, completely different processes, completely different timelines than the legislative side. Next. So when you do that, what are some community essentials for zoning and other rules? How do I advance my community? Well, first thing you have to do is sort of define what it is your community wants. That is actually a difficult task. A lot of communities will adopt a comprehensive plan. That's a statutory requirement if you're a township or a county, not if you are a municipality. And making a plan or adopting a comprehensive plan is sort of the vision of your community, the legislators, the residents, the businesses of what they want your community to be. Are you going to be a commercial community, residential, lots of apartments, lots of green space, bikeways? What is your community going to look like? Planning helps define an overall view for the community, and it also creates some predictability for, hopefully, for developers and others who are looking at your community saying, I've got this product, is this a place that would welcome me? Another thing is you need to adopt a zoning code, and that covers all of the 4 major areas of zoning, to have your legislative determinations to create what your geographic community, how it's going to be divided up, to sort of do compatible land uses and transitioning of land uses among each other, and allow for its enforcement. One thing that counties and townships, counties and municipalities can do is they can adopt subdivision rules and regulations. And that also helps with that's technically not zoning, but it helps implement zoning by allowing you to create and divide property in a way that will support the zoning. And then one of the things that I think helps if you have a community who is trying to attract development is there are state statutory authorities for different incentives that may be available to a community, like tax increment financing or community reinvestment areas, or all kinds of things like that involve real estate taxes. Sometimes local governments, if you are a municipality, can do something with income tax incentives. And those are things that will help spur development should your community choose to take advantage of those. Next. So, one of the things that Eileen mentioned when we were talking about this early was there are some communities that want to talk about residential development. How do I attract residential development? Well, this again kind of depends on what your community plan is. Do you just need housing? So you want to have an attractive location where people will come and build new housing? Do you have lots of housing? And so you want to have maybe elevate your standards or change your densities or have some kinds of overlays or additional restrictions on housing? Or do you want to have sort of more of a mixed use kind of commercial residential in the same area and that kind of thing? Well, you can adopt a zoning code that will allow for all of those. But there are some traditional sort of zoning classifications, what I call straight zoning, which would mean you would have single family, multifamily, senior housing type districts. Senior housing isn't always its own district, although a lot of communities are kind of going to that because they have unique needs in terms of parking requirements, maybe setback requirements. The intensity of their use as it affects neighboring properties may not be the same as a regular multifamily apartment building. Particularly, the best comparison would be if you had a multifamily apartment building near Ohio State University or a campus versus a multifamily apartment building that was all senior housing and assisted living that was maybe near a park or near a school. It would have a completely different effect. So zoning for residential development, you can have straight zones, single family, multifamily. You can have mixed districts where you would have maybe commercial on the first floor and residential above it to sort of create some kind of a community mix of housing and Sort of walkable communities and urban infill is more popular now than it was maybe 20 years ago. Back then, everybody wanted lots of green space and big lots, and now it's sort of going the transitioning the other way. And then planned unit developments, and those are developments where it usually requires, not always, but it usually requires a significantly larger piece of land and allows you to mix different products, whether it's single family, multifamily, senior housing, and nursing homes all in the same district, or it could be commercial and residential and transitioning areas and green space and parks and schools all in the same district. And that would typically be a much more complicated process. Doesn't have to be, but often is a much more complicated and comprehensive process involving larger land. Next. So other community considerations, if you are trying to attract developments, some of the things that you should be aware of as a community is that for a developer, typically time is of the essence. When you have a really long process, that's an expensive process that has lots of delays, it affects the developer's contracts to purchase real estate. It affects the funding that they're able to get and secure. It affects their costs in the project, and any more with the market and supply chain. Some of their development and building costs can go up so significantly in a relatively short period of time. So the longer your municipal or government process takes, the bigger the potential adverse effect is on a developer. The other thing is the availability and timing of necessary utilities and public improvements and infrastructure. So if they need water and you don't have water available and you got to expand your sewer plant, that's one conversation and timing for attraction of development. Or if you're doing large lots with well and septic, that's a different time frame for development. So those are all considerations with the kind of development that you're going to attract and the development that's going to be attracted to you. Also, one of the tools that governments can do with developers is have development agreements of what the expectations are for each party and what their contributions are to help have the infrastructure that's necessary for the development and help have the developer maybe make contributions that are proportionate to what they're developing. You can't have them fund your community, basically. One of the things to look at is your application, permit, tap, and inspection fees. Those fees have gotten significantly more expensive just to try to recoup costs and put costs back into those systems for capital improvements on a long-range basis. And if those are significantly expensive, then for a large development, those are real numbers for a developer, and that may dissuade development. And then people worry about, well, what happens if a developer promises all this and walks away? Well, there are community remedies for development that can be built into your code. Things like having a developer post a bond if they're making public improvements, having time limitations on something like if you get a variance, you have to implement it within a couple of years or it goes away, or a planned development has to be developed within a certain time, or it terminates, or they have to come back and renew it. Same thing with conditional uses. You've got to implement it within a certain time, or your permits, building permits, you get a building permit. They're not typically good in perpetuity, and you can regulate those things through your code. And the final slide, and then I'm going to stop talking here, is, oh, nope, there should be one more. That if from the developer side, and you're going to hear from a developer, but from the developer side, if you want to attract zoning, what they look for in part is they want a stable government and a reliable process. They don't want to go through a whole process. It costs them a lot of money to do their due diligence on all of the things that they're doing. They need to have a stable government and reliable process so they don't get to the end and have the legislators say, well, we don't like this development at all. And they're 6 figures down the road in costs and nothing to show for it. Predictable outcomes. If your community says, yes, we want this, it's hard to go through the end and then have it turned down. And that's a very expensive proposition. A straightforward zoning code resolution. When you're looking at that, the first thing I look at when I'm on the developer side especially is the zoning code clear or is it in a gray area? And am I going to have to argue about that and what risk does that give me? Have a timely, expeditious process that's predictable, have affordable fees and costs, have government participation with the developer if it's something that you want to incentivize or encourage. And then I think communities that do well are communities that support win-win developments. We see them all over the place, and that's a great thing. And so when you're trying to attract things, not only do you have to know what your community wants, but I think you got to be in a stable kind of way. I appreciate the time, and I thank you.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. That was fantastic. A lot to think about. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to come back to Catherine, but we're going to move on to John Melkai, who's going to give us an update on just what's happening in this Central Ohio marketplace. Unbelievable. Here we go, John.
Hey, thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I will tell you from starting out, I'm actually coming to you live from downtown Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'm here for a conference. For those of you that don't know, Minneapolis is a municipality that eliminated single-family zoning in the not too distant past. One of the things they did not do, though, was they eliminated single-family zoning and allowed property owners to build up to 4 units by right on each of their homes. But what they did not do is change their setback requirements or lot size mandates, which arguably would have had a bigger impact. But let's go ahead and jump right into the next slide. So one of the things you all need to, and everybody needs to remember that, yes, we're in a virtual world, but businesses still want to be located where their people are. And I think it would be short-sighted for folks to think entirely in the context of, well, everybody's going to be remote. Proximity to work matters. It still matters. Next slide, please. Healthy housing market has all of the components that you see listed. A market in a locality simply cannot say, you know what, we're going to have all high-end housing, or we're just going to build all workforce housing. For instance, you hear from the Affordable Housing Alliance, their study that there's a 56,000 affordable housing unit gap. That's true, but we just simply can't build 56,000 affordable units and that solves the crisis, because people need to be able to transition from subsidized to workforce into that missing middle, move up high end, and then move back down the chain. Next slide, please. So I often hear, we're building so much, we can't believe how much we're building in Central Ohio. And this is in comparison to other regions that we compete with economically as a region, the Austins, Nashville, Charlotte, Raleighs of the world. Keep in mind, as you see that Columbus number, and we permitted 11,800 units last year. That's a 15-year high. That's a 15-year high, and you see that we're trailing Austin, who was over 40,000, Nashville at 25, and Charlotte just under that. But a couple things, especially for this group, that I wanted to point out. In the orange, you will see single-family home sales. Now, what should concern everybody in Central Ohio is the fact that our single-family permits were significantly lower than Indianapolis, which is a peer market of ours, by about 2,500 units, and even Cincinnati. But for multifamily projects coming online, and primarily in many ways coming online in Franklin County and the city of Columbus, the housing crisis that we have would be even worse. We are significantly short of single-family homes within the region. Next slide, please. And this is just a way to track the building permits that you've seen. And you see we did have an increase last year. There was an uptick. But again, a lot of that driven by multifamily building permits in the region. Single family numbers, they have increased. That's a positive thing. But they've not increased anywhere near to where they need to be. Our housing study showed that we need to be building anywhere in the 12,000 to 15,000 unit range every year. And really, we should be building approximately 3,000 to 4,000 more single family units than we are currently. Next slide, please. This slide just shows you the difference. In the blue, you'll see what a new home is costing in the MSA versus comparable to existing homes. Those numbers, ideally, you get them a little closer together. But they've been trending this way for some time, really coming out of the Great Recession as new homes continue to cost more money. We've seen that stabilize a little recently, and the cost of existing homes continues to rise at a pretty rapid clip. Next slide, please. This is something that's really important. The months of new home inventory and how many months of supply we have in the market. As you see, we've we're at a low 19.8 months of supply that we have in the market versus in 2015 we had 51 months and the historic average is 33. We simply do not have enough of a runway for the hot market that we have now as far as getting homes zoned and approved so that builders can build them. It's imperative that we continue to get projects online at a faster clip so builders can build and meet demands. There are builders now purposefully withholding homes from.
I was listening to a webinar on with Jill Melke from
oh,
the BIA
Jill,
the
hey,
Morpson
Jill.
site.
Jill?
Staying up with all the trends.
We need everybody to turn their microphone off. Let's see if I can grab that one. There we go.
There we are. Okay.
Go ahead, John. Sorry about that.
Okay. It's imperative that we get more homes zoned and approved so that builders can meet the demand that is in the marketplace. We are hearing again builders restricting sales because they're not sure what they're going to have left to continue to build in the future. Next slide, please. This shows you that 67.5% of people in our MSA can afford a new home or afford an existing home in the marketplace right now. Again, that's trending down. This is a number, again, that's concerning. You want that number over the 70s if you can get it there. And as supply has become restricted, home ownership has become a little more challenging for folks on a regular basis. Next slide, please. And here's your new home affordability chart. 45% of people in the MSA can afford a new home. That changes from community to community. But we want to see this number over the 60s, which is where I believe Raleigh-Durham is right now. Next slide. Okay, this was touched on earlier by Ms. Cunningham, but biggest obstacles we have right now, length of time for zoning. It takes forever if you can even get a project approved to go through the zoning process, and that costs time and money. The landowner is not a developer does not traditionally, sometimes that changes, purchase the land outright and then get it developed. So, the landowner still is being paid options. It still takes a lot of time, attorney's fees, engineering fees, all of those things rack up during the time of zoning. And having a very clear zoning code makes that process work much smoother. Densities, this is a big issue in housing affordability. We're seeing more and more trends away from smaller lots to a smaller lot size. Developing large lots is expensive and it adds significant cost to a development. And it's quite frankly not something that we hear oftentimes that a lot of consumers want. There is always going to be need for large lots. Don't get me wrong. There are communities and folks, that's what they're looking for. But by and large, the trend nationally is for a smaller lot size. Not necessarily a smaller house all the time, but a smaller lot size. I use this line often if you've heard me talk before, but Bob Schottenstein, the CEO of MI Homes, always makes a point that Columbus is the side yard capital of America, the Columbus region, because nowhere else do they build homes where they have side yards as a frequency as we do here in Central Ohio. Architectural and design standards, this is a relatively new one. And I'll often say that this is in many cases, local officials deciding that they're going to be Chip and Joanna Gaines and decide what every house needs to look like. We're not disputing that communities should have a say in kind of general architectural standards. What we're seeing, though, is a move to such a prescriptive, specific type of house that in many ways it's discriminatory. It's effectively saying, our builders will say, we simply can't meet these design standards for less than $400,000. So communities are effectively, through their design standards, dictating the price of a house that they want in the community. And in many communities that have put these restrictions in place, there's been no new development since that time. And then length of time for development plans and that process. Probably one of the most unheard of challenges we have in development is working with our local governments is staff and workforce shortages. We have them on our sites and local governments have them on theirs. And we have a lot of folks who are really taxed right now on the local government level, trying to review multiple plans coming through. It adds additional time. We need more engineers. We need more plan reviewers. We need more everything at every level of government. Next slide, please. Oh,
All right.
there you are, Eileen.
Hey, gosh, thank you, John. All right,
Absolutely,
you're
thank
setting us.
you.
You're setting us up really nicely. So we'll have you turn your camera off and stay with us, and we'll have Scott turn his camera on. You both set up the private developer scenario pretty well. All right, Scott, where you want to start here from the developer?
Wow, thank you. That was, as you said, that was a great lead in. Much to think about and much to comment. And I would agree with principally everything that has been shared already. I would want to know, kind of nuance a couple things. We work primarily in small communities around Central Ohio and around Ohio. And when we go into those communities, I'm constantly hearing we need more housing. And we agree, there's a market and need in the small communities around Ohio, which is why we're there. But it's not enough to say that, we must demonstrate it. And so I think we have to really understand our local market. And by that, I mean a market study. One of the things that a small community can do is be very proactive and say, this is the type of product we need. This is the depth of the demand for this product. And this is the way that we can help move that forward. Developers obviously want to come and understand that, but the developer has to tell the story to the builder. And it used to be that we would be competing with, a small community would be competing with a local larger city, a Columbus, a Cincinnati, or Cleveland. Now, many of the builders are super regional or national. So as John pointed out earlier, it's not enough to say that we need housing here. It is more a factor of you're competing against Wilmington, North Carolina, or Savannah, Georgia, because those decisions are now being made in another city by an analyst. So we've got to be able to bring forward not only the great assets of the local community, but we also have to tell a story, and those stories come with a market study. So there are some great resources. GOPC, Greater Ohio Policy Center, Allison Goebel, they do a great work, and there's others as well, which I would really recommend considering. And not just understanding the story that needs to be told, but also understanding what you want as a community. Catherine alluded to this earlier. A comprehensive study or comprehensive plan is so critical for a builder or developer to come in with a general understanding of what is needed. When I look at a community and there's no comprehensive plan, immediately that puts us in a place of trying to figure out how to aggregate or understand what the market and the need is, and to bring consensus around that. A comprehensive plan that's already been done, or at least begun, gives us an idea of a good and healthy starting point. We want what you want. We want a flourishing community. We want a successful project. We want to see those happen, and it all begins with a good plan. So comprehensive plans are so critical. The other thing that Catherine alluded to and John did as well, and I think is so important, is bring your code current. A lot of times we'll go into communities and the code will be undeveloped or undeveloped. It will need a tremendous amount of work. As a developer, we'll spend a huge amount of time helping rewrite code or bringing it current. That's time that could be better spent elsewhere, advancing ultimately the development of the project. So bringing your code current is a tremendous help. And along with that is understanding your infrastructure. Be very transparent about that. It's okay to say we don't have water. Have a plan to fix it. The developer can come alongside and be a part of that solution, but not solve it individually or alone. It's just impossible to do that now. There was a time when the developer would be tasked with building a lot of public infrastructure. It's just simply not possible now. So no, there was a comment about incentives. Understand some of the public-private partnership opportunities are there through TIFs, new community authorities, grants, and other opportunities to help build infrastructure. And I think the fourth thing I would say is, and we also alluded to this, or this was earlier alluded to, is your process as a community is so critical to not only ending up in a right and a healthy place with the project, but it really directs the outcomes. So think about things like your building department. Think about your permitting process. Think about how you can help move the process through. If your community, if your council or your commission only meets once a month, then that just creates a very slow, divine process that the builder or the developer are working through. But if there's ways to streamline or accelerate that, that's going to be very helpful for the outcome of the project and ultimately the community.
That's very, very, very helpful. So I want to ask you this. So tell me about a community that you, without naming them, that you like to work with and some of the reasons why. What has been, I'm gonna go here, and that they're doing these kinds of steps to make it happen. What would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Catherine maybe alluded to this earlier. Leadership in the community is so critical. If there's not alignment in council, commission, the staff, the developer or builder then is spending a tremendous amount of time trying to bring those bodies together for direction. When we come into a community, and you can almost tell right away, the staff has one sense of what needs to be done, council is in one direction, the mayor, if there's a mayor, has a different vision, and the commission is in a different space. And so it's trying to bring all that together is tremendously difficult and challenging. It takes a lot of time. If we come into a community and we see that there's a common and shared vision across all the bodies, that makes a tremendous a tremendous impact on what we can do and how we can move things through. So I'd say leadership first is very critical. I think the second thing is define the rules that the builder or the developer that you want to them to play by, hold them accountable to it. We want to be held accountable, but don't create a moving target. It is so challenging to get down the road and all of a sudden find, well, there's one more thing we need to do. Put that all on the table up front so that the developer or the builder knows or has a lot of clarity on what the expectations are, and then they can make a good and clear decision on how to move forward.
Excellent. Very good. Catherine, I'm going to swing over to her for a minute. Catherine, I want to talk about, can you build in a community without penalizing the existing residents? I'm coming in with a new development project. The pushback's coming from the existing residents that we're going to be negatively impacted. What kinds of things can communities do to sort of maybe protect the existing residents or calm those fears or address that?
Well, there are several. Am I still on?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, I lost my screen, so there. Sorry. Well, there are several things that communities do. I think there's one important thing that communities cannot do, and that is you cannot expect a new development. You can expect them to sort of carry their own weight, but you can't expect them to pay for existing conditions. We see that a lot with communities where they try to impose impact fees and additional things for new development for the impact on their community. They can pay fees that are directly attributable to them, but not more than that, and typically not service fees. Those are typically for capital costs. A lot of times we see a requirement that they dedicate certain open space or contribute to an open space fund so that there can, if it's residential development particularly, so that there's money to build more parks. to help with community development. A lot of times they sort of have to do control of engineering control of water and things on their own site and have to make road improvements for the impact of their development. So really, communities can either both enter into development agreements and adopt codes to have new development sort of contribute to the impacts that they will have. But I would say if you're a community that just doesn't want development, you're going to be disappointed because there's not much you can do to just stop development. On the other hand, I think a lot of communities are very pleasantly surprised that development brings more development, and in the most positive way. I hear a lot of communities complain they don't have housing stocks. Their kids want to come back, live near where their parents live, but there's nowhere for them to live. They don't have apartments available. They don't have starter homes. They don't have new housing for them to move up to. I think there was some conversation about that earlier on. So I think that you have to be open-minded about the fact. The other thing that, maybe you don't have enough restaurants in town, or people need more places to eat or groceries to go to. Groceries are a real struggle in some communities. And it takes rooftops and population to support those things. So additional population can bring some of the amenities that maybe people are looking for. So I think that they can do that both through zoning, through proportionate and appropriate impact fees and contributions for open space. And typically that's the way we see it done.
And you make a good point, because even the most isolated community, it isn't very long before they're wanting those additional things they left behind. They want to get out in the wilderness, and then pretty soon it's where the amenities. So I want to ask John Melkai if he could tell me a little more. You started alluding to that. What are those amenities? And now I'm really talking about maybe they're one county out. They surround the urban space. And certainly Scott can talk about that too. But what are the amenities that you're most hearing people want?
Let's see. Well, I think, and I wouldn't even call this an amenity, but I think when people are looking for where they want to build and where they want to move, they're looking at a few primary drivers. One being the school district, and the other being proximity to employment and entertainment, or other amenities, grocery store, etc. So those three are really the key drivers in where development occurs within our region. There's a lot of greenfield around the region, but as you see, they typically tends to follow where a strong school district is and where job centers are. So let's take Union County, for example. I think Union County is an attractive place for a lot of development because of the proximity to Honda, Scott's, and the other businesses along that 33 corridor. We've seen a push for residential development in Union County and in Marysville, where some of that older housing stock was. And what that will do is it'll supply and help bring to the bodies that are needed to bring those grocery stores in, and to keep those businesses in downtown Marysville open and busy, not just on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but or Friday and Saturday, but Sunday through Thursday. So it really is. There's a lot that residential development can bring to a community and make more things possible. And listen, I don't think we can downplay the fact that if you're in a community where people want to move, that's a good thing. And you should want to have people that come to your community that are going to contribute to the community, volunteer in the community, spend money in your stores, spend time in your stores, volunteer at the schools. There's a lot of things that go into it. So, I think it's important to remember that housing is a component of economic development. We have a phrase we use, home is where a job goes to at night. And a lot of, you can't just have the jobs in the communities without having the workforce that ties into it as well.
Excellent point. So let's tell all three panelists, I want to throw this question out at you. If we don't do the zoning, if we don't look at our zoning, what are the consequences to our communities? If we don't take a look at what's happening to our existing zoning, what's going to take place?
I'll run first, and I would say that just as I'm at National Association of Home Builders conference right now. And I will tell you that there are a lot of communities that once upon a time had a lot of building in their communities and a lot of growth in their communities, and then they no longer do. So it's important to recognize that that these opportunities and this demand that's in our marketplace is not something that is guaranteed to us in perpetuity. So we need to take advantage of it because, as Scott alluded to, the dollars and the significant amount of resources that it takes to develop land and to build homes in any market, it can easily be moved. And if we are not a welcoming environment for builders and developers, those dollars will go someplace else, and it will become increasingly more challenging and more expensive for people to build homes. You'll see the cost of homes increase, and our housing affordability challenges will persist.
Scott, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to also just kind of to jump on with what John just shared. We are now, I've been doing this for 25 years, and there's been some highs and lows over that 25 years. I have never seen a market like we have right now. And I don't think anybody really fully understands how deep and broad it is. The builders themselves, and we are not a builder, we are a developer, but the builders themselves right now are trying, because of the demand, to make decisions based on where can we get the highest and best and quickest return. Time is a critical component to that. So when they come to a community or they join us in a community, their first question is, how long is it going to take for us to get product on the ground? The code is a critical component to that. If the builder assesses that and determines that it's going to be challenging, they're just going to move to the next community because they can move to the next community. Right now, they have so many options. The barrier to entry is so low for a builder right now that if the code isn't current, if the market isn't well defined, and if you're not willing as a community leader to step in and help support and drive that, the builder is just going to move on to next, and they will not look back.
And Catherine?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think that you know, when I look at some zoning codes, I am amazed that, you know, you can always tell what the community concern is, because they may, a lot of them, I always kind of chuckle. They'll have like 20-page zoning code and then an additional 15 pages on sexually owned businesses, which was a big thing at one point in time, you know, regulating, you know, those kinds of businesses. So they'll have a huge concentration on that and not much on others. And I think in some ways those codes can be very difficult, and updating codes is critically important. Just even the nature of development, if you think back about what homes were, you know, being built 20 years ago and the way that those subdivisions looked, are much different than many of the subdivisions look today, with a much more emphasis on, you know, empty nester housing and senior housing and affordable housing and nursing homes and assisted living, way more than we saw 20, 25 years ago in those markets. So I think some of it is being aware of, again, with market studies, who your market is and who you need to serve, and making those opportunities available. And that fundamentally starts in having a zoning code that makes some sense. Or if you have no zoning, then you'll get what you get, you know, wherever it is, whatever it looks like, however it is. And there are places like that too. And I don't know how attractive that is to development, because the problem is where you're going to develop and what may happen next to you is very unpredictable. And that is not necessarily a good thing. The stability and updated codes, more reflective of current trends and financing opportunities, you know, because you've got to get a lender who's willing to loan based on what's happening. The trickle down from that can be not just on the government side, but on the lender side. I mean, I've seen ideas for lots of great products where you're going to live and work in the same house, but between the commercial and, you know, even with the sort of mixed market housing, the lending is really complicated on that. And so even if it seems like a good idea, if you can't get the financing for it, it's not going to work for anybody, whether it's the builder, the developer, or the end user.
So
So
Scott,
they've got to
what's
be
your
predictable.
What's your experience with that predictability of the investor of getting the financing? Do they look at the community a little more carefully and see if it's an accepted project or if it's contentious, or do they get involved to that extent?
Certainly, it's all about risk assessment for them, and that's a critical component to it. And if the community cannot clearly demonstrate or walk through a plan there, again, capital is fungible. It will move to the area that is clear, understood, and can get the best return.
Okay, all right. Any other comments that our panelists are thinking about they wanted to share with this audience? You have a wide mix of people here. We have rural communities that are looking to attract a developer. We've got some urban communities that want to maybe still fill in do some infill, and maybe even relook at their variances and zoning rules just to protect what's already taken place. Any other thoughts that you'd like to share with this audience?
I would jump in here, and Catherine alluded to this earlier, kind of the reactive nature to some communities. And I would just say that, especially for those rural communities, having an effective comprehensive plan and zoning before development starts to happen on a wide scale is something that we would recommend, because I think it just takes the pressure off of your legislative bodies, your staffs, developers, and folks then kind of know what is expected. Because what we've seen happen is, in some instances, there's not a lot, development happens, then there's a reaction from the community, and it goes too far on the spectrum. So being proactive in these cases is, in my opinion, one of the best things that you can do. And we've seen that, I think Plain City's done a pretty good job of that out in Madison and Union County. And then on the inside the Beltway, I think Reynoldsburg has done a good job of that in setting out those expectations. It makes things much more clear, and it makes these discussions less combative. That doesn't mean every parcel is going to fit exactly into the comp plan and zoning exactly the way we want. But it in the vast majority of cases, it's something communities can do to have their say on the front end and make it a little easier for businesses and the community on the back end.
Yeah, can we just spend a quick second on that community communication? So we see people doing some public relations before the project goes in. Scott, from the developers aspect, any advice on that? It's sometimes the community has communication staff that can have these open houses and be right out there and open meetings to talk about things. And what's your suggestion for a lot of them are small. We don't have governments with a deep staff here.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Of course, I can only kind of speak to our process. We like to spend a lot of time in the community before we move forward into product or into kind of the formal zoning process. So we like the idea of having kind of town hall meetings or sketch plan reviews, just to kind of build consensus, get feedback without the pressure of asking for a vote. This is just good time for community dialogue, particularly if there's not a comprehensive plan. Any way that we as a developer can participate in that helps us form our plan and get more clarity. At the same time, it also helps us address some of the concerns that that may be there, but not necessarily coming forward. And the more we can engage there on the front end, I think it's healthier for everybody.
Excellent, excellent, absolutely true. We've seen even some people hire communication experts to help along the whole way in the project. So certainly that is. So last comment, panel, last thoughts before we wind up here.
I think I'd like to share a thought, and that is, I've always viewed zoning as something that can and should be a win-win. It should be a win-win for the developer. It should be a win-win for the community. And I agree with some of the comments that sometimes communities get very reactive instead of proactive about development. And sometimes I find that they have a lot of suspicion that somebody's trying to get away with something. And I think usually that is not the case. But maybe sometimes it is. Most of people I represent, that's absolutely not the case. So I would encourage people to sort of view it more as a sort of a win, trying to accomplish a win-win where the developer has to be able to make some profit, right? I mean, they're in business. They have to be able to make a profit and to have a profitable development in the community. I think sometimes communities have big asks for things that they want that maybe in a different time, in a different era, I used to say to developers, your problem is you give up too much, you know? And at one time they did, and they sort of set some community expectations, and then times have changed and the gap is narrowed and that affordability factor is no longer there. So I think that the expectations on both sides need to be reasonable. And if they are, and if developers and communities are working toward the common goal of some type of development that is embraced by both of them, development can be a win-win in every community.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end on. It gives us all hope and things to aspire to. Well, I want to thank our panelists so much. We really appreciate you taking the time today, and thank you for all the communities that tuned in. I think it's an exciting time to be in Central Ohio. So certainly a lot going on. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go ahead and adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.